a few minutes after the surgery, I noticed that all the doctors who performed the surgery, the 2 doctors and the medical director and another doctor who was also on duty in the hospital, and I think 2 nurses, they all came into the room. And when I saw them, I knew something was wrong. The way they, I don't know, I just knew something was wrong. So they were asking me how I was feeling. I said, I'm fine. And I kept asking, how's my baby? I said, oh, your baby's fine. She's in the nursery. And okay, so my baby's fine. What could it be? My mind was already racing. I was thinking, next thing that came to my mind was, well, maybe they were going to tell me they took out my womb during the surgery or something, And then they said that my bladder was damaged during the surgery and that I would have to wear a catheter for a while. Honestly, at that time, I didn't even know what a catheter was. Like, I'd seen it before, but I'd never worn it. I didn't know. Apparently they had worn it for me already, I think, from right after the surgery. So they showed it to me and they said, oh, this, and you're gonna have to wear it. And normally, when you've just done surgery, you would wear it normally for a day or 2, thereabouts, or tops 3 days. But that in my case, I would have to wear it for weeks because my bladder couldn't function on its own and it needed time to heal. So I thought, okay, well, I mean, I didn't know what I was expecting to hear, but in a way I was relieved that it wasn't worse than that. So they left. About an hour later, they brought the baby, started the whole, put the baby to chest, tried to breastfeed. They took out the stretcher. I tried to sit up on the bed and, put the baby to chest and all that. And, the breastfeeding tutorials began. My mom helped me, to hold the baby. And yeah, so this was a Saturday. I had my baby on Saturday. Sunday, I was still in the hospital. Still no food. They told me that after surgery, I couldn't have food. And I'm thinking, this baby is out. And now I really want to eat. Can I just have something to eat? But they said no, that I couldn't eat because I just had surgery. And normally when you just have surgery, you can't just eat like that because they need to be sure that your body comes back to its regular function before you start to introduce food. So I'm not sure if it was Sunday or Monday, but it was definitely not on Saturday. They gave me a spoon of water to sip. And after an hour, they opened, when you open a bottle of water, they poured water in the cover and told me to sip it. I had that, and then I think after another hour, they came with a cup with very little water in it. They told me to drink it. I drank it, and then after, I don't know, maybe another hour or so, they came with pap and told me I could take pap. And I mean, I had not had pap in months, so it was awesome. It was beautiful. I had the pap, and from that point on, I knew, okay, let me just recover. But for some reason, they didn't encourage me to get up and walk. I was still in so much pain, so even getting up to walk for me was a problem, and nobody was really saying I had to walk. I guess because of what I had just been through. Even my mom she didn't make so much of a fuss, for me to walk. She was just glad to see me alive and all that. And the doctors too and the nurses didn't really exactly push for me to walk. So on Wednesday, on Wednesday, one of the nurses came and said, oh, you haven't gotten up from this bed at all. I said, no. She said, you have to get up and walk. Oh. You have to get up and walk. You can't just lie down on the bed, So she told my husband to try and get me out of bed. And he did. And, I felt like a baby all over again because I felt like I was just learning how to walk again. I had not walked in days. It was so hard, so painful, so difficult. It took us, I don't know how many minutes, but he took me around, through the hospital corridor. I walked back and forth. Just once, I couldn't go more than once. And then I went back to the bed, and the nurse came back and she told me that I had to keep doing it, over and over. That was on Wednesday. Thursday, she told me to go down the stairs because the ward was upstairs. So she told me to go down the stairs and back. So we did it again. My husband held my hand. We walked down the stairs, came back. It took a very long time because I know that I would have to stop, after a few steps. I'll stop, stand, you hold me, and then we'll continue. Friday, I started begging them to let me go home, and they said I couldn't go home because I still hadn't recovered to the point they wanted me to recover. The baby was a bit jaundiced, and of course I was still wearing the catheter. So it was just a combination of so many things. But Nigeria tradition, we had to go home for the naming ceremony and all that. So I told them I want to be at home for my baby's naming now. So on Friday night, very late, it wasn't very late, it was like evening time, they finally agreed to discharge me, so we settled the hospital bill, but they told me that I had to be coming back, and all that. So we settled the hospital bills and left the hospital and went home. I got home, and I think the whole the excitement of being back home, I wasn't pregnant anymore, I could eat, I was just excited. I remember that the first thing I did when I got into the house was I hugged my husband and I cried. I know it was tears of so many things, tears of joy, tears of the pain that I had been through. I couldn't explain it, but I cried, and just a few minutes after I got in, I think I was going to sit down or something. I can't really remember what I was trying to do, but I guess the whole excitement of being at home totally made me forget that I was wearing a catheter, and I tried to sit or so. My legs, I don't know. All I remember was that I was wearing it on my right, because they told me instead of holding it, they kind of strapped it around my thighs, from here. They put like a rope down. I just tied it all the way. So it made my leg kind of heavy, so I had to keep carrying it. And then when I got home and I thought, I'm already at home, why are they still? So I just took it off and I was holding it. And I guess in the process of trying to sit down, I stepped on it and the thing just pulled out of me. It wasn't painful, but it was scary. It was slightly painful because the thing was tiny. It wasn't like it was anything big, but I was so scared because they had told me my bladder couldn't function, and so many thoughts just started running through my head at that time. And panic set in. My mom was there, my husband was there. Oh, okay, let's go back. And they bundled me into the car. We went back to the hospital, and they had to. And the process of putting it in is not actually pretty. It's not pleasant at all. It was easier for it to come out than to go back in. So I had to, sit through that process again, and then they put it back in, and they told me they tied it back to my leg, told me not to remove it unless I wanted to empty it, So I went back home. Saturday was the naming ceremony. I guess because of the weight of the thing that I was carrying, my feet were swollen, especially my right foot, because that was where I was actually carrying the load. Even throughout my pregnancy, in spite of being so sick and all that, I didn't experience swollen feet at all or any swollen part of my body. But then from that day, my feet were so swollen, like extremely swollen. It was so hard to even put it on the floor without feeling the water. I could feel, like I'll put my foot on the floor and feel so much water in it. And because I couldn't really move around, obviously, because I was carrying something on my body. So moving around, which would have relieved the pressure, I couldn't do that. And also, I was still in pain. So walking around, didn't really come that easy. So I was dealing with the pain, dealing with, breastfeeding, taking care of the baby, and then dealing with carrying this thing around. And I remember that the first night, the second on the Saturday night, I was sweating so much. I couldn't even explain it. I was sweating so, it was so bad. I was sweating so much that my nightwear that I was wearing was soaked in sweat. I couldn't explain it. So I asked my mom, and she said, oh, it happens sometimes to pregnant women after delivery. Maybe, I can't remember what she explained, but yeah, she said it happens. I was sweating really, really badly, and my feet were swollen. So it was just a very uncomfortable situation. Few days after that, I then realized that I had not passed any stool at all, and I had started to eat at this time. So I was eating and I couldn't pass stool, and I felt like passing stool, but I couldn't. I would go to the toilet and literally sit for hours. Like, the only time I would come out is, my mom would call me and say I should come and breastfeed my baby, but I had to sit in the toilet because I knew something wanted to come out. It just wasn't coming. It was so hard. So I sat there, for hours. I would go out, breastfeed my baby, go back to the toilet. It was terrible. In all of this, I still had my catheter on. So my husband, had to take me back to the hospital because it got to the point where it was so hard. I started crying. It was really bad. So we got to the hospital and they gave me stool softener and told me to take it for, I think, 2 or 3 days, and that if after finishing it, if nothing was happening, I should come back to the hospital and they were going to have to do a procedure. So I started taking it because I didn't even know what procedure they wanted to do for me, but of course I was already scared. Like, I've just gone through hell. I don't want anybody poking me anywhere or putting anything in my body anymore. So I drank the thing so religiously. 3 days passed, nothing happened. I still couldn't pass stool. So I went back to the hospital and they told me they were going to have to pull out my stool with something called, I can't remember the name, enema or something like that. I think it's called an enema or something close to that. And, so they took me they told me they were going to do it inside the labor room. And I'm wondering why I'm not about to have another baby. Why are you guys taking me back to the labor room? And they said, oh, that's where they had I guess they use it sometimes for pregnant women. I don't know. Or people in childbirth, but they never used it for me. So I don't really know if that was the reason why, but I was back at the labor, and then they put me back. The thing just brought back bad memories because they put me back on that table, told me to lie down and hang my legs again, and then they started to insert something into my, where stool comes out from. So before they started, anyway, they had talked me through the process. They had told me that once they put this thing in, your stool is going to gush out. So you would need to jump up from this table. There's a toilet just right inside the ward there. And they told me once they put that thing and bring it out or something like that, I'll have to run into the toilet and, pass stool because it will come out. It will literally come out on its own if I don't go into the toilet. The thing was like, it was like a hose. I can't really remember the details now, but I think it was like a hose with water. Those hoses that they used to wet plants or wash cars or something. It was something like that. But, I felt the pressure. They put it in, something gushed out. If it was water or air, I don't know what it was. And yes, I felt like I needed to pass stool immediately. So I just got up and ran to the toilet and passed the stool. And it was like going through labor all over again because I felt so relieved. I'd been carrying this thing for, I don't know, at this point it was more than a week after I'd had my baby, maybe 2 weeks, I can't remember, but it was days and days of pain. So I felt so relieved after the procedure, and I thought, thank God, all this is over. I can go back home, enjoy motherhood, bond with my baby and all that. And so I went home. While in the middle of all of this, I think, okay, the catheter was finally taken out about 2 weeks or so after my baby came. And I was beginning to just get into the routine, breastfeeding, changing diapers and everything. My mom was with me and my mother-in-law as well, so I had support. My husband, even though he was going to work, but he was around a lot. My dad was back from his trip, so I had family around. I was really, enjoying myself. My brother was around as well. Because I was still healing from the from the surgery, they had told me I couldn't take a full bath, until the surgery site had completely healed. So my mom would take me into the shower in the morning and just basically wipe me off with wet towel. She'd just clean my body, you know. She would bath me, you know, more or less from here down, but up I couldn't pour water, so she'd just use a wet washcloth, and I still couldn't bend properly, so I couldn't do a lot of that on my own. So she had to do it for me every day. She'd put, you know, water on the towel and clean my body and all that. And I craved so badly for a bath. Like, I just wanted to feel water all over my body. I felt dirty, you know, I felt sticky. Sometimes I'll find myself doing this, like, oh, just seem like I'm smelling, you know, or something. My body felt so sticky. And I was still dealing with the night sweats. And I found out later that was hormonal and fairly common in new moms. So I had very bad night sweats, and I could not take a bath. It was really bad. So after going through the whole stool episode, and that had stopped, and I thought everything was fine, one day after the bath, after, you know, I was trying to get dressed, and I just noticed something wet around the incision site where the surgery was done. I just felt a bit of wetness on it. I couldn't really, my tummy was still kind of big, so I couldn't really see it properly. So I tried to pull up my tummy to look at it. I stood in front of a mirror, and I used, I was alone at the time. My mom went out, my husband had gone to work. So I took cotton wool just to see what it was. I cleaned it, and I saw pus. And I was wondering, why? But I really didn't think much of it, you know. I just cleaned it, and I put on my dress, and I went on with my day. And then about an hour after that, I felt the same thing again, and I cleaned it again. And then the thing kept coming back, and I'll clean it again. And then the pus started to look reddish, so it became a mixture of pus and blood. So I called my husband, came from work, took me to the hospital, and they told me that the incision site was infected. So they cleaned it, I don't know, applied something, and then they covered it up with gauze or so, and told me, they said, oh, maybe I've been pouring water on it. And I said, no, I mean, I've not had a bath in weeks. I couldn't have been pouring water on it, you know. So they told me that, well, this time it's infected. Water can't even touch it. And here I was already craving for a good bath. So it was like taking 10 steps back. And then they told me I had to come to the hospital every other day for them to clean and, you know, dress it. They call it dressing. So that was the beginning of another, you know, long journey. And I think this went on for another maybe 3 weeks, if not more. You know, it went on for quite a while. So I would go into hospital, and then obviously I had to go with my baby because I was still breastfeeding. So it was just a lot of work. In the middle of that, we had days where we would have to go for immunization, you know, go to the hospital for immunization, and then still go for dressing. And I wasn't sleeping well. At around 4 weeks, my baby developed colic, and she wasn't sleeping at all. She would cry almost throughout the night. So I was really stressed, you know. I was so stressed, and then having to deal with this infection, and then they put me on some antibiotics and all that. So that happened, you know, and eventually the incision site started to dry up, and I thought that was the end. About 4 weeks after my baby, the postpartum bleeding that I had been experiencing since the baby came stopped. And I wasn't sure why it stopped. I know the doctor had told me, I had read, you know, different things about, there's no timeline. For some people it stops very early. Some, you know, it takes months, you know, weeks or whatever. So mine stopped at 4 weeks, and I just thought, okay, it stopped. You know, I was actually relieved, you know, because it wasn't very pretty having to deal with blood every day. About a week or two after that, not too long after, I started to bleed again. And I thought this thing had stopped. So I was confused. I didn't know if it was still the postpartum bleeding that came back again or if it was my period. And I know that they say, especially when you're breastfeeding, it takes a long time for your period to come back. So I was confused. I wasn't sure if it was my period or not, you know. So my mom said, oh, let's just watch it and see that if it was my period, you know, normal period, 5 days, 6 days, it will stop. You know, and yeah, so I was watching, waiting for it to stop. 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, 8 days, 9 days, this thing didn't stop. I think maybe on the 9th day or thereabouts, I went to the hospital and I complained about it, and they said, oh, that's not normal. If it's, the postpartum bleeding shouldn't stop and start. So it's not likely to be postpartum bleeding. And if it's my period, it shouldn't go on for such an extended time. But anyway, they will check. Sometimes cycle could change due to childbirth, but let's go for a scan and, you know, see what's happening. So I went for a scan and they told me I had fibroids. And I remember breaking down in the doctor's office that day. I cried so much because I just couldn't believe I was having to deal with that. Like, it was just back to back, one thing after another, one thing after another. Like, why me? You know, and I remember the doctor I saw, she's a very good friend of mine now. You know, we became friends over the time when I used to go to hospital every time. She more or less counseled me through it, you know, and told me, you know, it was nothing to worry about. It was a very small fibroid. It was just one. It was very small, and they might not need to do anything to it. I should just watch the bleeding. If it's not excessive, that is expected to stop after a few days. You know, if nothing crazy happens, they will just leave it, you know. So I went home. I don't even think I don't remember them giving me anything for it. I don't think I had to take any antibiotics or anything because they told me that bleeding would stop on its own. And yeah, and after a couple of weeks, I think, the bleeding stopped. And yeah. And I was just waiting to see if something else would happen because it was just one thing after another. And I waited 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I was fine. Nothing happened. And I guess it was at that time that I started to really enjoy the experience of motherhood, bond with my baby. I was on maternity leave 3 months, and then after 3 months, I had to go back to work, you know, and yeah. That's the summary of my of my first birthing experience. What that did was it put so much fear in me that I told myself several times that I was done. I was never going to go through this anymore. Like, why would I even want to have another child? After going through all this, no way. It would never happen. But you know how they say, Yoruba people will say, Ọlọ́run má fi gbàgbé sí. After a year or so, I started to think about having another child. But I was really scared. I was genuinely very scared because I was like, even the pregnancy was so difficult. Like, why would I even want to put myself through this anymore? But then I thought about it, like, I know that I would want at least 2 children. So I braced myself up, had a conversation with my husband, and I said, well, let's try again for another baby. And we started to try. And in 2014, actually, because I had the baby in 2015, 2014, September, around the same time when I got pregnant with the first one in 2011, I discovered I was pregnant again. But before this time, I had done so much research about how to combat this thing if it comes again. I wasn't going to have hyperemesis anymore. You know, I read everything I could read. Google was my best friend. You know how they say don't consult Google for medical issues, but I did. I read every single thing I could read about hyperemesis. And I was so scared because I read that when you've had it once, there's a very high chance of having it again a second time. And it was just a horrible experience because, I couldn't eat or drink I tell people pregnancy is 10 months. As far as I'm concerned, it's not 9 months. That 9-month thing is a scan, because if you calculate it, it's 40 weeks. 40 weeks is not 9 months. 40 weeks is 10 months. 4 times 10. 4 weeks in a month times 10 is 10 months. So it was 10 months of no food, no water, nothing. So I was really, really scared going into it the second time. But then I got pregnant the second time, and it was beautiful. Like, I almost couldn't believe it. I had morning sickness for the first 3 months, but it wasn't bad. It was mostly triggered by my toothbrush. Like, when I wake up in the morning, I try to brush my teeth. Once the brush gets anywhere close to my throat, I would choke on it and I'll throw up. And that was about it. Once I throw up in the morning, that's it for the day. I'm done. Occasionally, I would still throw up, during the day. But somehow I found ways to cope. I remember that in the early stages, I would walk outside of my office. At the time, where I was working was a block of, office flats, or what are they called? The high-rise building. And we had this vacant floor opposite our floor. So whenever I felt the need to throw up, rather than let it come out, I would walk to that floor, open up the windows, and just take fresh air in, and I would just breathe and breathe and breathe. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But I was just constantly looking for, coping mechanisms. Another thing that helped me to cope, I discovered Trident. I remember that when I was pregnant, I always said, God bless whoever made this thing. So I would stock, but the bad thing about it was it had to be cold. It always had to be in the fridge. So I would buy packs of Trident chewing gum, the green one, put it in my fridge, and just pop one out. When I get to work in the morning, I'll pop a pack in the fridge and just go every time take, because that was the only thing that could help me suppress the saliva. So I guess maybe from my first experience, I'd learned to cope better the second time, and I did not have hyperemesis anyway, so it was easier to cope. And of course, I didn't have the motion sickness. Wasn't as bad as it was the first time. The first time it was terrible. Like, I couldn't move. If the car moves from here to there, I'll throw up. It was really bad, and I had to be in the car every day because I was going to work almost every day when I was in the hospital. But this time it was better. I could even drive, myself. So I didn't have a driver. I used to drive myself to work across the Milan Bridge every day. And because obviously there was no motion sickness, I also could make plans to fly, to travel. With the first one, I could, it didn't even cross my mind. I was too sick to even think about going anywhere. So yeah, 9 months, 10 months actually, it wasn't as eventful as the first one, but it was okay. It wasn't so bad. And the birthing experience was completely different. So I didn't have my baby in Nigeria. I don't know if that contributed to it, but it was a beautiful experience. I had to have a surgery the second time because I remember when I went to the gynecologist to discuss the options, they just said to me, just go do a surgery a second time, that it was a bigger risk for them to try and bring out the baby naturally because I didn't have the first one that way. So I should just prepare for surgery. And yeah, I had my surgery. I carried the baby up to 40 weeks, actually. So, I didn't have that whole baby not growing because they were monitoring me very closely. I was going into hospital every week. The baby was growing normally. I was eating, not so much, but at least I could eat. I remember that towards the end of the pregnancy, the vomiting came back, but not so much. But it was a lot more than it had been in previous months. But I kind of didn't mind because I knew the end was very near. I remember that the day I was going to have the surgery, because I had given them my whole history of everything that happened the first time, how my bladder got damaged, I had fibroids, I had infection. I told them everything basically, and I went with all my medical records from the previous pregnancy, and they had gone through everything. They were so thorough. I remember that on the day of the surgery, they told me to, the night before, I went into the hospital the day before, they gave me something told me to go back home. They didn't keep me that night. They told me to come back on the day I was going to have the baby. But then they told me that at midnight, 12 midnight, just on that day, I should wipe my whole body with that thing. It was like I don't know what it was, but it was like a cloth that had methylated spirits kind of on it. They told me to wipe my entire body with it and not have a bath after that, and just come straight to the hospital in the morning at 7 o'clock. And I did. I got to the hospital, they put me on a bed, strapped me up with so many gadgets, heart monitor, monitoring the baby's heartbeats and all that. And the doctors started to come in. There were so many. They were coming in one after the other, introduced themselves, told me what they were going to be doing during the surgery, took my history. It was more like I was repeating the same thing, over and over. But I knew I was in good hands because they were so thorough. They asked me all the questions possible. And yeah, I remember when they finally took me into the theater. The place was so big. It looked like secondary school dining hall. It was really big, and then there was just one table, white. Everywhere was white, and they just put, the small operating table in the middle. There was so much light everywhere. My mom was with me. My husband couldn't come on that trip, but my mom was with me, and my sister and my sister-in-law. And when it was time to go into they were really cool. It was a completely different experience. They asked me how many people I wanted with me. They said it could take 2 people, and they asked me who and who I wanted. My mom said she couldn't come because she was scared. My sister also said she couldn't come. So my sister-in-law came with me, and they told her she could even come in with a camera and record the process and all that. So she sat with me, she was talking to me all through the procedure. She was, doing a video. She was praying with me. And the doctors were there, chatting, having fun. It was a completely different experience, completely. It felt very similar to the first one, like the whole feeling of cutting me open, tugging, while pulling the baby out. And then they showed me the baby, it was a boy, beautiful baby boy, And yeah, after the surgery, they wheeled me to a recovery room. Told me I was going to be there for an hour just to monitor and see if nothing crazy happens. So usually they have a recovery room close to the theater so that if anything happens and they have to rush back into the theater, it's easy. So they took me to the recovery room. I was there for an hour. They monitored, had a doctor with me all through. And after that, it took me to a ward. And that night, I could eat. They gave me a complete 3-course meal. I had normal food. I had fruits, I had dessert, I drank water. And the day after that, I passed stool because they had already started giving me stool softeners from the beginning. I don't know if it was based on my previous history or if it's routine, And I was on very strong painkillers, so the pain wasn't as intense as the first time. And I remember saying to myself, and I think I even told my husband on the phone after the baby had come, I said, I think I can still do this one more time.